Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome back for another gathering of the Nature Journal Club. I want to start off with just a word of thanks to all of you. We received a matching grant from the Dean Witter Foundation, and they said that they would match if we could raise $15,000 in support of the Nature Journal Club from donations. They would match that up to $20,000, and it had 2 months to do it. And in those 2 months, you more than passed the $20,000 goal, and thank you so much. I'm so deeply moved and so very grateful. This is coming up is going to be an amazing year for us, and your support really makes it possible for me to make this work for us. So I'm deeply moved and deeply grateful, and I just want to thank all of you. So big round of applause for you guys. This Nature Journal Club, this is your year, right? This, if you thought you had a breakthrough last year in your art and journaling, no, this year is going to put it to shame, because we're going to go crazy with what we're doing. This is the year that the habit of nature journaling embeds itself so deeply in your life that you can't think of going anywhere without your journal. And we're going to have all sorts of amazing stuff going on. We're already planning our first palette party. We're going to make gouache palettes, and you can see on our Facebook group we're starting to pick out a date and a location for that. Yes?
I wanted to offer the house. I know it's way down south, but we are open any day you want to, if that's convenient.
Outstanding. Outstanding. So we'll get a bunch of locations. If there is one that is big and centrally located, we'll go for that. Otherwise, party at Lena's. Now, you don't even have to drive to it. It's going to be really fun. And we're also going to have another palette party for setting up your watercolor palette or refilling your watercolor palette if should you already have one. We are going to have a whole bunch of classes, and I'm very excited about this. I'm in conversation with one of the most amazing nature journalers in the world about the possibility of Claire Walker Leslie coming to the Bay Area, doing a workshop for us, with us, and us getting to go out in the field and sketch with her. She's been a real inspiration to me, and we might be able to get her out on the left coast here. So that would be very exciting. This is going to be a great year. But that being said, I want to start with a confession to you. Because we've now been having these nature journaling classes for 2 years. And about 3 weeks ago, I realized that in all of these workshops and all of these classes where I've been showing you, this is how I draw a squirrel, and giving you the process. This is my mushroom approach. I haven't actually been showing you what I've been doing. I haven't been showing you what really my process is. I've implied part of it, I've suggested part of it, and I've given some pieces of it. But there's this huge part that I've kind of obliquely pointed to, but haven't really fleshed out. And this workshop here, I want to correct that. All right, so I want to come clean with all of you and put all my tricks on the table. Because we have been focusing on structure a lot. We've been looking at, okay, you want to draw a mushroom, here's how to think of how the gills radiate. You want to draw a frog, here are some anatomical features of their hips and their legs, so you can see this little corner in it, and like, oh yeah, I can get that in my sketch. And then they've got the big eardrum here. All those sorts of things. But that's actually only one part of what is going on in my head. Those sort of structural function sorts of characteristics of the things we're drawing are really, really useful when you're drawing and sketching in nature. But there's this whole other part where we focus on shapes. And we've looked at this a little bit, talking about negative shapes, but it actually goes much deeper than that. And some of the folks in the previous workshops that I did yesterday and earlier today, so the report is from these folks that some people said that, oh, this is the missing piece. And so this is going to be really different from the way which we usually do things. And I want to show you what my whole kind of routine and process is. and see if this perhaps is a game changer for you in how you go about keeping your nature journal. You ready? All right. So first of all, is it your first time here? So first time folks, welcome. You are now official members of the Nature Journaling Club in good standing. And if you've been at a bunch of my other classes, what you would have seen is I'd be talking about, okay, let's draw waterfowl today. And I'd give you all sorts of anatomical pointers about them, about how the scapular feathers overlap and the flank feathers come up and cover the wing and these sorts of things. How the eye sits into a big cheek up on the side of the head. And we look at these and we kind of can assemble this duck in our brain. And what I usually end up doing is starting with what I call the posture, proportions, and angles. These are sort of my major three keys of how I lead into doing any drawing, where the posture is sort of the angle of the body, the overall angle of it. The proportions are how big is this body relative to its head, right? Because if this was, say, a bufflehead duck, its head would actually be this big relative to this body. And if it was a merganser, it would have a head this big relative to this body size. So that's the proportions. And the angles, this is an idea where we're, try this just as an experiment. Looking at this duck on the screen here, you'll notice that if you look at the shape of the blue water here as that little V, the relationship between the head and the back is actually a lot more clear to you than if you're actually looking at the duck itself. Because here there's all this detail that we get distracted by. We're thinking of the head, the neck, and all this sort of stuff. But when we look at that simple shape right there, that really helps us get the relationship. The angles of this really places our head. So think about the shape of the angles here underneath the head like that. This is what I refer to as kind of carving in the angles. So I usually start with posture, proportions, and angles, and we kind of build up our critter from there. I'm going to start by an excerpt from a workshop we did on drawing waterfowl and kind of show you what the sort of structural approach was that I was representing of how I go about this. And then I'll show you where that starts to fall apart. So I would start off, this is what I call my posture line, and for something floating on the water, they're very, very horizontal. And oh, by the way, I'm going to be going through this more quickly. If you're like, wait, slow down, how do you draw a duck? There's a whole other workshop which we did on drawing waterfowl, where I go kind of more slowly and carefully through this process and really go into it in more fine-grained detail. This is sort of this is an hour-and-a-half class now condensed to half a minute, right? So, and then we would put in the head, and in this we'd be looking at how big that head is relative to this body and where that head goes relative to this body. A couple of features that helped start to make this look more ducky is placing the bill on and imagining this rump of the duck here kind of like a clock. Where on that clock does this tail come in? Right? And if you draw your duck head with a pen that doesn't work, if you draw your duck head, another pen, there we go, kind of like this, you get these things that sort of look like this weird sort of Daffy Duck, Woody Woodpecker sort of thing. And in order to make your duck actually look ducky, the trick is actually the bill comes out from the base of the skull here and then swoops in up into the skull like that. A little bit of a throat here, and that is, there's your Ducks Unlimited logo, right? So plopping that in there on our bill. More about that in that How to Draw Ducks workshop. And then I would start to look at those negative spaces, right? I would visualize this so that I could draw this, right? And all this part I usually do in this very pale non-photo blue pencil, or if you're just using a graphite pencil, you're drawing in this with as light lines as you can. You'll be drawing your major details on top of that. This is just to sort of grok out the general proportions of this, essentially to create the silhouette of the beastie that you're drawing. If you have a silhouette of something, it's easier to fill that in. So we kind of create our silhouette, and on top of that, we're going to put in our details. Have any of you seen that little meme that's going around online, how to draw an owl? Right? So for those of you who have missed it, it's this little sort of a joke about how to draw courses, where it's sort of two frames. And the first, it says how to draw an owl. And the first frame is this. It says draw two circles, and there's like a little body circle, a little head circle, two circles. And then right next to that is this drawing of this owl, every detail like perfectly worked in, all the shading, completely finished drawing. It says draw the rest of the stupid owl. Right? Actually, they didn't use the word stupid. They used something else in there, but we can't put that. This is... but I love it. So it's just, draw two circles, draw the rest. So this this is like draw the rest of the duck, right? But what is actually going here on between this and this are two things. One is, and the Drawing Waterfowl course kind of goes into this more carefully. One is sort of understanding a number of these anatomical features. How do the scapular feathers overlap? Understanding about how the flank feathers come up. And the other thing is that the duck is right there in front of you. And you're looking back at the duck, like what goes over here on this part? You're like, oh, there's a little patch of feathers there. All right, so you're actually looking at the duck. So this, going from here to here, you can't really make it up out of your head. You have to have a duck, right? And it also really helps to have studied a little bit about the anatomy, for instance, about how that bill comes out on the bottom. Those sorts of things allow you to go from this to this. I often then put little color notes into my drawings, and at first what I'd do is if something was blue, I'd put a letter B into this part. And if this part was orange, I'd put an O into this part. If this part was brown, I'd put a B into that part. If that part was black, I'd put a B into that part. So that kind of didn't work very well because everything ended up being Bs. For some reason, like all the colors, they said, like, let's think of names for colors. Let's start most of them with B and G. Right? So green, gray, it's like, hey, thanks, guys. Couldn't you have, if all the letters in the alphabet, we're going to have, three major ones, with the B. So maybe what you can do is, start it with the first. So I then decided what I'll do is for my little letter color code, I'll put the first two letters of the word. That worked really well, because, you put, for the black part over here, and the blue part over... Okay, no, maybe the green part and the gray... Yeah, so that didn't work. So now I've kind of come up with, I get the first and the last letter, unless it's just one word like violet, where there's no other thing that's going to start with V. So this is my kind of color code system. If I'm going to be adding my color later, I'm out there what color was that part? So this really helps me kind of get that in to help me go from this to shading over that and twirling it in. We have other workshops where we're talking about how do you add watercolor in the field. But you can see how this duck is essentially built on this framework of understanding these parts and putting pieces together, right? And that's great. This works really well if your duck is doing this, right? All right, this duck is use this system to draw me, all right? Oh, look, negative space. God, I can work this out, all right? But here's the guarantee. If you study this really, really carefully and you go out to a pond, you're okay, I'm ready, bring it, all right? The duck in front of you is going to be doing this. Right? You're thinking where is the, oh. So what you do is you startle the duck, and then it puts its head up, and then you can draw the thing, right? So instead of that, how do we approach something like this? Because very often, you want to draw, there's a gorilla, and it's not doing some kind of Vitruvian Man position thing where you can see all these parts, and you're thinking, all right, how do I? It's in this sort of weird gorilla yoga position. How do you do something where it is in these sort of non-standard poses where your kind of anatomical way of thinking about it begins to break down? Anybody have this experience? You kind of here's how to draw mammals. Then you get out there with the mammal. It's not doing what it's supposed to be doing, or maybe it's just kind of. Then if it does start doing it, it's going to be walking back and forth like that, right? You think just, and finally it stops and it goes into the yoga. You're ah, right? So how do we handle when they're doing these weird contorted things? So think about this shape here. That doesn't feel like a gorilla arm to me. But from this position, this is actually what this gorilla's arm was looking like. So here's the other thing. You want to have part of your brain with an understanding of anatomy, with an understanding of kind of structure and how to build things up that way. But here's what the other part of it, and this is what I kind of pointed to it a little bit, but this is a huge part of my game, is I want to start thinking of this like this. All right? I want to think of this body like a lima bean. I want to think of this leg, it's like this weird comma shape. This, if I had just put this shape in isolation, you'd like, oh yes, of course, that's the arm of a gorilla, right? It doesn't look anything like an arm of a gorilla, but when the gorilla is doing this, that's what I saw of it. So what you want to start doing is you're going to try to train your brain to take this whole thing and flatten what you're seeing in your head. You want to imagine it, this three-dimensional object in front of you, as like a flat picture projected on a screen. And if you were perhaps making a quilt, and you were to take big scissors and cut out the shape of that head, what is the shape that of the piece of that quilt that you would make for that? So you're taking this three-dimensional thing, and you're turning it into an angular 3D shape. And you're going to put that shape next to a different shape, next to a different shape. And that's actually what makes the gorilla. All right? So it's weird to get your brain to think this way, because your brain has an idea of how a gorilla arm should look. And what you're going to see out there is not that. Right? And the hard part is to believe the gorilla. You've got to get out of this idea in your head of how the gorilla arms look, and you want to believe the gorilla. So here's an example with a kind of a process that I did. I was actually out sketching with Lena, and we're out by, we saw this, there's the mallard duck that was sitting in front of us. And it was turned with its belly to us. Its head was turned around away from us, making this weird shape, and it was standing up out of the water. So this kind of classic view didn't make sense. So the first thing I did is I got out my non-photo blue pencil, and here was its posture, and I put in an oval for its body and an oval for its head, because I didn't want to make, it's easy to accidentally make the head too big. Actually, any part of something that you think is really interesting, we tend to draw that way too big. So that's why people draw huge beaks on raptors, because it's cool. Your brain goes like, oh, wow. And then we overdo that. If you see a bird with a curved beak, we overdo the curve because we're interested in the curve. So that part of something that we're really attracted to, our brains will overdo it. So this helps me kind of, at first I was just looking at how big is its body relative to its head. And then what I did is I just thought of that head as, again, that piece of the quilt. And one way you can do this is if you're looking at something, you can close one eye, hold your pencil up in the air, and say, if I was drawing that, I would do this. Or sometimes I'm actually looking through my telescope here, and I've got my hand over here in the air, and as I'm kind of going around something, I'm making those corners. Doing that kinesthetically actually helps me notice where something is turning. Or you can even say it kind of goes, it kind of curves over down on one side. There's a sort of V on the bottom, then over flat, then up, angle around, another turn back to, you can talk your way around it. But that doesn't look like the head of a mallard to me. That looks like, I don't know. Again, maybe the sort of a weird comma. But that was the shape that I saw at that time on that duck. And again, the hard part is you believe the duck. And you say, okay, duck, I'm just going to go with it. That doesn't look like mallard head. I'm just going to, you know better than I do. Let's go with that. And then it had a spot on its belly. So I drew in sort of the oval of that belly. I could see part of its scapular feathers on the back, instead of thinking like, how do scapular feathers foreshorten as they're moving away? I wasn't thinking anything like that. I was just thinking, okay, on this side I see a little comma shape, and on this side I see a double bump shape, and it's bigger. And I just thought of each of those as a shape next to a shape. So I'm actually not thinking of this as a duck. I'm thinking of it as a shape next to a shape next to a shape next to a shape. I then put in the belly, right? Doing the same thing. And there were actually these little kind of wings sticking off the edges of this. I put those in as two other little shapes, and there was the oomph of my duck. And then the really interesting part was that it was standing up out of the water, and so I drew the legs. And thinking, okay, I can handle this. I'm going to draw one leg, and then I'm going to draw the other leg. Right? But as you look at this thing, the major shape that was really popping out, and what made it all come together, is to draw the space of the air underneath its legs as an actual shape. Because if you can do this, and when you're looking at the duck, this is easy to visualize. If you can do that, then this is actually really easy to follow. And that makes a duck doing yoga. And I couldn't make this up out of my head, but you have to have a duck in front of you. And this is gold when the how it fits together model that you have in your head doesn't quite fit what you're seeing. This is the same thing that happened making this goose right here. This goose I constructed as a shape. If you look really carefully, there's some non-photo blue pencil you can see lightly in the background. First kind of blocked in the overall shape, then put each one of these pieces in as a different shape next to a shape next to a shape. And the end result feels like a sleeping goose. Here's another example of something that is kind of crazy making to think about the kind of anatomy of what's going on. When a heron takes that long neck and folds it down, kind of what's actually going on if you were to have X-ray vision is you'd have a skull in here, the spine comes out the back here and makes a sharp turn, comes over here to the front, comes down and back in here, and did that really help? Right? No. You're like, I'm seeing these weird lumps. So what I did, I was out at the bay recently, and there was a heron out there, and I made a sketch of it. And when I got back, I tried to sort of deconstruct. I used the same technique to draw it. I sort of deconstructed that process that I used to sketch it. And here's sort of my, oh, by the way, when you see these sort of step-by-steps, those are, I never can really do those in the field because I don't have my scanner with me. So I had to kind of copy my process when I got back home. But this is copying my sketch. I was looking at a heron, and what I did is I started with lightly, loosely blocking in the shape of the body. You see those sort of light lines in the background? That's going to prevent me from actually accidentally getting a body that's way too big. And then I looked at the shape of its head. And this doesn't feel like heron head shape to me. Like I'm thinking like the beak should be bigger, right? I don't want to be thinking all this should stuff. I want to be looking from this angle, what am I actually seeing? And for that, its head was turned away from me a little bit, and that was the shape of the head. So I just said, okay, I'm going to believe you, and I think the beak should be bigger, but that's what you're showing me. So I copy that down, and then I'm going to look at the shape of its neck and attach that to it. So here is the shape of the neck, and I just attached that shape next to that shape. So I'm taking individual shapes and putting as a little abstract shape. Here's sort of this crescent moon with a little tooth in it. And that's going to go here. I'm going to put what is the shape of the section of the back? What is the shape of the wing? And in all of these, you're looking back at the thing going, well, that does, if I were to make this up, I would have come up with something different. But I'm just going to go with it, okay, and trust the heron that if you pay attention to the pieces, the shapes, right, it's going to come together in the end. The shape of its tail, and there's my heron. So constructed by putting a piece next to a piece next to a piece. When we see it like this, oh, we blend it all together into a heron. Let's, using this picture here, let's take a look at this and try in your sketchbook to get out of, so try to, as you're looking at this, be thinking not about what its neck is doing, all these sort of things. See if you can really kind of get in there and look at shape next to shape next to shape. And a good trick to help you do this is if you're kind of stuck on something, just close one eye, bring your pencil up into the air and trace in the air the shape of this a few times. And then go like, okay, and you can aesthetically get what you're doing. And then you're going to put that down on your paper. I usually find it helps to kind of lightly block in, really lightly, loosely, kind of the overall shape of something. And that's going to kind of constrain those bigger shapes that I'm putting in. So I start with some sort of light thing that gives me the overall proportions of it. Then I'm going to just start carefully blocking in one shape next to another shape next to another shape. 5 different people would have, you could pick out the boundaries of what each of your shapes are different ways. Let go of what should be and just see what is. It's weird at first, but some people find this actually much more freeing, much more of an intuitive way to draw. Drop your shoulders. Remember to breathe. See what happens as you sketch if you let your lips form a slight smile. This bird will fly away in about a minute. We don't need to finish this picture. We're just exploring this way of connecting shapes. Here's another one. Back to this one. Now we've got a way of dealing with this one, right? Let me just show you a kind of a few routes to approaching something like this. One thing you might want to do is just take your pencil and hold it up right at the edge of where that head comes in, and see how far across that body does that head reach. Huh. So what I'll do is I'll hold my pencil up like this, and just if you put it right there, notice what happens, how far across that is. If I notice that before I start sketching, that's going to help me sketch. One way of approaching something like this might be to initially block in the big proportions of what you're looking at. Then look at the negative spaces here. Notice how when you look at the negative spaces, these angles really pop out at you in a way that they didn't when you're just looking at the duck. Right? So I might then focus on those angles. If I get that overall shape, I can then, inside that, start to work in the shapes of those little interior shapes. So try to create this duck, not thinking about like, oh, is that the flank feathers there? Where's the... But just sort of put a shape next to a shape next to a shape and see what happens. Every photo in this slideshow is from the website of Vivek Kanzuri. And he is a nature photographer who is also part of our Nature Journal Club, husband of Lena, and daddy to Anaya and Matali. He gave me permission to use his photographs from his website. And I encourage people to go there, check out some of those photos. You want to kind of do some practice with this at home, or you want to see any of these photos a little bit longer. It's got a very accessible, easily searched website. Go to birdpixel.com. birds.com and see what he has. My other big favorite website for birds is seeingbirds.com of our very own Ashok Khosla. So what is this process like for you when you start to kind of break things down into shapes? What are you finding that's like?
Much easier.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
How many people are finding this a little bit easier? Okay, that's just about everybody in the room. Why haven't I been showing this? I don't know. Wanted to make it look difficult. But this is a very, very powerful way to draw, even when you get something that is complicated. Okay, so before you go in here, but first of all, just imagine this as flat. Look at this as a shape. Somebody in one of the other classes said that's sort of like the Elvis wig. Do you see the Elvis wig? Yeah. Right? You want to look at each one of these just as an abstract shape. And actually, completely divorced from any of the rest of the bird. Don't try to draw the bird. Just draw this shape off on the side of your paper right now. Up and it comes down. And then it comes up and down, up, over, back. Oh, okay, I need to pay attention to my proportions. I want to look at that as a shape, not thinking, oh no, what are these upper tail coverts or whatever part of that bird that's going to be? What are they supposed to be doing? I might approach somebody like this by first saying the body is roughly at this angle, and here's my body, and then lightly, loosely saying my neck is kind of going up somewhere like this, and then stopping if I made the neck too high or too low or too far forward. It's easy actually to change and reposition those things at this sort of initial kind of light sketch part. But once I kind of feel that, oh, that's roughly close enough, right? Then I'm going to build in on top of this, shape by shape, the rest of the bird. I just want to point out a few kind of interesting shapes. Take a look at how this negative shape right here carves that neck and that back. If you try to draw the neck as a shape, you'll go nuts. You try to draw this, you've got a fighting chance. You want to make those legs work? When you get to the legs, try this. Draw that negative space between those legs. And your legs will pop from there. Right? Draw the negative space between those legs and see how easy it is then to draw those legs. You will be delighted. But see if you can kind of just work your way shape by shape across this bird. Give it a little time, give it a chance to kind of mess around with that and see what happens. Drop your shoulders, breathe. This bird is your friend. So this is arguably the most beautiful crane in the entire world. Crowned. Is it crowned or crested? Crowned? Crowned, I think. Isn't that just, I mean, even the eye, this little piece of azure. Kind of makes you want to go to Africa. All of a sudden you don't have to worry about how do I handle this 3/4 view of the backside of the butt. All I have to do is see that as a shape. Can I draw that shape? If I can, I can put this bird together. And it will be here for about a minute more. If you want more quality time with it, you can hit that website tonight, and we'll get a whole bunch of hits on that website. The crowned crane. Crowned crane. If you have been studying your bird anatomy and mammal anatomy and studying those other workshops that we've done, don't worry, that work is not a loss. I think that is having an understanding of what is happening structurally with something is very helpful in drawing what you're seeing. It helps you notice things that you otherwise wouldn't have noticed, be able to place them in relationship to each other. But when you're really confused by something, this is a great way to go in. When I'm drawing, I'm not using one or the other. I'm using both of those approaches together. So in just a moment, I'm going to do a step-by-step demonstration. What I want you to notice is that where in it am I focusing on a shape? Where in it am I like, oh, now I'm going to try to draw the foot? And not thinking of the foot as a shape, but actually drawing the foot. So sometimes I'm drawing the shape, sometimes I'm drawing a beak, right? So those two approaches I'm going to bounce back and forth between them. And here's my target. This is the bird that I'm going to be working with. It's a little shrike that lives in Africa here, a little fiscal shrike, and let's mess with it. It's got this interesting foreshortened view here, right? And I drew this on toned paper, and on toned paper it turns out that our non-photo blue pencil doesn't really work very well. So when I'm drawing on toned paper, I'll usually just lightly with my graphite pencil do that. If you look very carefully here, can you see the posture, the proportion circles going on right here? Right? So that's the framework that I then can start plopping shapes on top of. And this one has this nice little white hat, so I'm going to look at the shape of that. And there it goes. So at first, I'm just looking at a shape. And then I'm going to attach onto that. I'm now going to start thinking more structurally. Say, okay, now I'm going to draw the beak and the eye right below that. So here, like I'm regularly drawing sort of my approach to drawing birds, where I'm thinking like, where's the eye and these sorts of things, and what's the space between them? Usually the space between the beak and the eye is closer than you think, those sorts of things. I'm kind of drawing those things. And this is sort of the regular kind of drawing. And then it's got this cool little patch by the back of its head. And I look at that as a shape. It kind of has this black meat cleaver shaped hood, kind of beau geste sort of thing, kind of sticking off the back of its head. And then I drew in its breast. As not thinking about feathers here, I thought of this as a shape. So I just looked at where did it turn in? Where were there corners in it? Where was the shape? Down here, maybe I'm thinking a little bit feathery. Right? But primarily, I'm looking at where are the corners in this shape. And then I did the same thing with the wings on either side. I didn't think of them as wings. I thought of them as a shape on either side. And you'll notice that as I was putting in this wing, putting in that shape here, I realized that I had put this little corner in a little bit too low. See here with this guy, this little corner actually should be all the way up here. So I just drew over that, fixed that shape, making my next shape. And then the legs. So how many people use that little negative space trick in drawing the legs of the crane? How'd that work for you? Some thumbs up? All right, so I'm going to do the same thing right here. I'm not going to draw its leg. I'm going to draw the space between the branch, its leg, and its belly. The square here a little bit better. There's the block of its chest. And then there was that side of its body coming out here, and then those hips down to the side. So if I have this as a framework, I have a structure on top of which I can draw my lion. So rather than initially kind of getting lost in, I'm going to try to draw my my lioness and her nose and the mouth and the little whisker beds. I'm going to focus on this sort of a thing and put these sections together. All right. Do you want to give her a try? All right. So there's a lot of ways to break her down. You don't have to necessarily use those same lines that I did, the same lions. But try to get your head not to zoom into that detail. You're going to, I want to draw the eye and the nose and the whisker bed. Just kind of block that critter in first. It's interesting how she sort of has spots like a leopard or a tiger in stripes. It helps as you're drawing the head, don't think of this is the lion's head. Just look at her as a shape. It's a shape next to a shape next to a shape. It's not a belly, that's a shape. What is that shape? You can trace that shape in the air with your pencil tip. Help you see that as a flat shape. There's a wonderful book called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. I think, in my opinion, it is the best book ever written on how to draw. You're guaranteed to find it if you go to a used bookstore, because there's just so many of these things in circulation. It's been in circulation since the Pleistocene, and it still is as good as ever. It's now in a new edition. Something that she does in the book that's really, really interesting is she has people draw a face. And often when people are drawing a face, we know what a nose looks like. And we draw that nose that we think how it should be. And we draw the eye because we've got, I know how to draw an eye. And we draw the eye that we always do. All she does is get people to put the photograph that they're copying upside down and copy it. And it really gets people to jump out of that symbol drawing and actually start to pay attention to shapes. And people invariably do better when they're trying to draw that thing upside down. So we're going to try that with this baboon. See, this photograph was taken in the southern hemisphere. Yeah, it's Northern Hemisphere optics. And, but your challenge is, as you're doing, is do not think baboon. All right? Think shape, 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 shape. Get yourself out of the baboon zone. Notice a couple of things. Hold your pencil up and look at how vertical that front edge is. Compare that to the back side, big kind of angle. How far down is that back angle? How wide is that shape? Right? We're starting not to think of this as a baboon, but as a shape. Right? See if you can, as much as possible, divorce the baboon symbol from what you're doing and draw this. But when you get all done, you get to turn your paper upside down and see what it looked like. We have a tendency to really get into our symbol. Like you get to this part, you're probably going to draw two eyes. Right? Anybody draw two eyes in there? Oh, good, 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 good. Okay, good. But when you kind of squint at it, you just sort of see like there's a dark bar across here. You really can't see this eye much at all. When you can also just sort of look at the shadows that are on here as shapes. I'm beginning to feel dizzy.
In college, when she was popular, my partner used to carry around a glass sphere. Because when you look at things with a glass sphere, it comes out upside down.
Oh. I think she's terrific. I still like to kind of look at structure.
Who is she?
What is it? Is that Enola Baker?
Betty Edwards.
Betty Edwards, that's right. That's right. Where did I get Enola Baker from?
Wow.
Betty Edwards. Yeah, she's brilliant. She's absolutely brilliant.
Looks like a monkey.
Oh, all right. This isn't fun. You get to turn it over like, hey, there's my critter.
Ashok is making fun of me because it's a chango.
Uh-oh.
It's Spanish.
One more to mess with. All right? Again, if you were to try to take this critter and think of it anatomically, where's its rib cage, where's its elbow, the shoulder, then the hip is over here, and then the knee's over here, it would drive you up a tree. Right? Instead, think of this as a shape. I've got this shape here. Hold your pencil up on next to its head, and notice how far over on this is that head. Isn't it interesting when you put up a little vertical, how that really helps you place something? So where is this line? So right there, kind of in the middle. And then the head's going to be on this side. And then look at how negative shapes really help you carve that. You get a little bit of that negative shape business going on. And then you've got something that you can start to really work with.
That even works on the screen.
Uh-oh, now we got this weird keystoning thing going on. It doesn't like being upside down. Sorry about the keystoning here. So, yeah, this is...
It's perfecting the image.
Yeah. Whoa. So we'll try to do that one more time. It'll only, the keystoning thing will happen in just a... You have a little bit of time to look at it before it keystones in. Ready? Oh, there we go. Okay. And we're back. You bet. Oh, no worries. But on Vivek's website, it's right side up. He reversed it. He reversed it. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. He took a picture of it through a sphere. Yeah. But see how this is, it would drive you nuts to try to figure out the structure. So shape next to shape next to shape. And what some people do is they actually wait to find things where the structure makes sense and then they'll draw it. Permission to draw anything in any goofy position. Yeah, I really love that Betty Edwards book. She is absolutely brilliant. All sorts of stuff in there, just like, it will help you kind of start to look at what is real. She's great on negative space. And this critter is going to slink away in about a minute. I want to put 3 more tricks in your quiver. So the first is, there's 2 other kind of ways that I sometimes will approach an entrance into drawing something. You know, once you kind of got something on the page there, it's easier for other stuff to follow it. But sometimes, you're looking like, how do I even start? Sometimes you'll feel stuck. And then the more you sort of sit there kind of staring at it with a cold sweat, the harder it is to make your first mark on the paper. So here's a couple of other ways to kind of help you kind of launch into something. And what I recommend is to just sort of play with these different approaches. See what works with you. If you like it, adopt it. If you don't, do something else. So number 1, this works great for things that are really moving around a lot. Sometimes what I'll do is I will start by just focusing what is the line of the back of that critter. Sometimes you might look at that sort of, what is the negative space along its spine, along its back? What is the angle, the movement of that back of that critter? If you have that, you then can fill down from there, right? Using observation and structure. Again, you're saying like, but I wouldn't know how the mountain lion is going to look. But we're assuming here that you've got some real reference in front of you. This gives you the launching pad to get into that. You start with the back and you can fill down. That's great for things that are moving a lot. For things that are more static, something that has just been money for me, and I use all the time, is I will start from the ground up. I start with the negative space between the legs. If I put this in, this connects to all these other parts of the critter. And it's easy to kind of get my critter on from there. I then think of like how far up here is the back. Is this a very narrow bodied thing? Where is that going to be? And I can fill out my critter from there. If I have this, it helps me build out from there. So sometimes that's another direction that you can use to kind of get yourself into one of these drawings. Yes?
I find that extremely helpful, starting from the bottom up, even though most everything I look at or read starts from the top down. And the reason I find it so helpful is that the weight distribution of the animal is so connected to where the weight-bearing limbs of the animal are. And so how the body is really depends on where those feet are.
That's very, very true. So this is getting that sort of body energy right from the start.
Right.
Yeah, very good way of describing that. I agree with you. So let's just sort of mess with the zebra a little bit. And I suggest ignore the stripes.
No, we're going to do those first.
Yeah. Yeah, if I were you, I'd start with this stripe and then go from there. But there's a couple of just really, really useful negative spaces. This negative space right here really helps you kind of get these pieces to fit together. A young woman in our last class pointed out, she said, "Oh, look at that." She was thinking kind of structurally about this, and she thought of this whole part back here as a big triangle. And she pointed that out to a number of the other students, and they went, "Oh, I like that." So sort of see what works for you for launching into this. Notice how you get into it, and then you can move around on that drawing. One danger, by the way, of doing things completely as shape next to shape next to shape is as you're working over here, by the time you get over to here, it's possible that your brain is working on a different scale, right? And so every once in a while, kind of back out. That's why sometimes people will have, some kind of scribble drawing just to kind of keep this thing constrained. You don't want to get bigger than this or much smaller than this. And if you start to do that, you might be getting into trouble. Let's see which of these approaches works for you on messing with the zebra. Or if you're feeling really bold, that zebra in the background. I wonder if there was a wildfire here recently. Yeah. It's interesting, the rusty red-brown patches seem to actually be part of the zebra, not just an anomaly of dirt. So be here for about a half a minute more. If there's any negative spaces or angles you'd like to cut in, do so. So how did people enter into this drawing? What were different approaches that people took? Started in here, kind of built out from there? That's also what you did?
Yeah.
Great. The big... Great. So, all of us carry in our heads fairly detailed pictures of the way we think the world should look and the way that things are. And a lot of these impressions that we have are actually wrong, right? And what we do when we look at something is our ideas of how it should be comes up against the way that it actually is. And there's a tendency for us to like the kind of homeostasis of I am right in my opinions about the world and people and the way that things work and even the way that giraffes look, right? And when I get evidence that's counter to the way that I think that things should be, there's an unconscious part of my brain that can easily ignore that and just sort of suppress that and kind of go like, oh, I'm gonna draw it the way that I think it should be. And there's a gift that the world gives you that helps you identify the places where your idea of how something should look is different than the way that it actually looks. And that is the feeling of surprise. And what you want to do is to train yourself to cultivate awareness of being surprised. And you see something that's a little bit of a surprise to you, go like, oh, and sort of feel that surprise and go like, okay, to articulate what surprised me about that, so that when I go to draw it, that thing that's different than the way I think it should be, I'm going to have an opportunity to correct it. So in just a moment, I'm going to show you a giraffe. And all of you have ideas in your head of how the giraffe should look. And what you're going to find is you're going to look at this giraffe, and what I want you to do is get surprised. Is let yourself be surprised. And say, I'm surprised by that, I'm surprised by that. Find as many surprises as you can in it, right? And each one of those surprises is a little indication of your general impression of how that should be is different than what you see. And saying your surprise out loud is going to help you be able to identify those things that are different and be able to correct them rather than have them be sort of lurking somewhere in your subconscious and fighting against your pencil as you're going along. So here comes the giraffe. Ooh, not you. There he goes. So here's our giraffe. So what's the surprise that you see in it? What surprises you about that giraffe? Isn't that weird?
Yeah, and the other one below it on the left.
Ooh, yeah, we want this to come straight, but there's a little bump in here. There's a big bump out here. That's really, really weird. That's counterintuitive. That's not right. It looks wrong, right?
Four things that look like horns, but they aren't. Two are ears and two are what, horns?
All right. Yeah. So these four big little pegs in the middle. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4. And look at the angles in those. Those negative spaces between those would really help you kind of handle those. All right. What else surprises you? This giraffe has a pinhead. I mean, check that out. Start looking around. You'll see a lot of, just go online and do a drawing of giraffe. Do a Google search. And notice how many giraffes are drawn with heads that are too big. Because it looks wrong. But if we go, oh, I actually want to find those surprises. If you find those surprises before you start drawing, you've got a fighting chance. What else surprises you here? Yeah?
That doesn't seem like it's horizontal, like you think of
Yeah.
the shape of it.
The teacup's going to fall off there. There's no cow table there.
The neck looks way thicker, but it means the, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, compare that with that. I mean, are you really going to let yourself put that in? Really? Are you going to let yourself make that? I mean, right?
Kind of not me.
Yeah. Hey, look, yeah, close here, wide here. Interesting. All right. And the other thing that surprised me, like, look at this negative space here.
Huge.
It's huge and really skinny. I mean, even this whole body. I mean, could you? Somebody pointed out in the previous class that they were surprised at how short the body was in this axis, right? And even after saying that, it was still found it really difficult to actually on the paper make it that skinny. Your brain is going to want to go like, no, it should be like. Right? So when you find those things that just kind of look wrong, I'm surprised by that. I'm surprised by that. I'm surprised by that, right? I then have a chance of when I go put that on my paper of having that come together. So surprise is a gift. Surprise is a gift. And if we start to harness that, it's going to help our drawing. Here's another thought. We're not just surprised in our drawings. Start to pay attention to other things that surprise you in our interactions with people and as we move through the world. And what you're going to be realizing is that the way that I think that the world works and that people are is actually different than it is. And we usually just suppress those anomalies. Right? But that actually might be a clue that I'm holding a bias that is actually different than reality. What an incredible gift. So surprise, I mean, this nature journaling it's a blueprint for living a better life, living a good life. All right? So think of how this idea in nature journaling can apply to other sorts of surprises in our world. Give it a try, mess around with this little giraffe, and see how having articulated those surprises helps you now be able to get something on your paper that feels more giraffe-esque.
Here's one for you. You can work while we are.
Oh, good. Oh, fun. Do you have an extra pen?
What kind do you want? You want a pencil or?
Sure.
Well, here.
Something you're going to find just about now is that as you get near the top of the page, you don't have enough room for the head. There's a tendency that we have as we start to realize that to start to just make the neck shorter and shorter and shorter, and we scrunch the neck so that we can fit it in on the page. If instead you draw all the way off the page, people go like, you ran out of space. You didn't plan that ahead. So neither of those are really pleasing. The best alternative is that stop about an inch away from the edge of the page. And people go like, oh, you're doing a study of the body. Right? Rather than scrunching up part of your drawing, rather than scrunch, just stop. Stop, don't scrunch. Right? Otherwise, you're training yourself to distort proportions. If you're going to run out of page before you get to the bottom of the legs, right, then just stop about an inch away from the edge of the page. Do another little study off on the side of here are the legs. Right? Or a little micro thing sort of showing what those legs are doing. Right? But be aware that we have a big tendency, like, I can fit you in, I can fit it in, I can fit it in, and then you have this like, this giraffe like, right? So you don't want to kind of draw that guy. Right? Let it be until you kind of get near the edge of that page, just stop. And then it's like, oh, it's a study of the giraffe's body. Ooh. If these patterns on the side of the body are going, I want to mess with those patterns, but it's going to drive me up a tree, how on earth would you do that? I'll tell you what I would probably do. I would probably draw my little sketch, and then I would draw a little window like that big over part of it, and only draw the patterns inside there. And if I wanted to contrast that with another part of the body, I might do a little window like that. Kind of like, look, it's different over there. If I had a favorite one, I could draw that out on the side and kind of show where it is. Right? You don't have to spend the rest of your natural life drawing giraffe spots. So that's a good kind of way of getting a lot of giraffe-ness in there. So what we've looked at in this class is a bunch of different ways of thinking differently about our drawing. Right? Of all the tricks and techniques which we've looked at, I'm going to ask everybody here, for yourself, pick your top two. If you were to forget everything else in this workshop, but you could take 2 ideas home with you, what are those going to be for you? But decide what your top 2 are. So Lena, what are you going to pick?
Shapes over shapes.
Right. So putting shapes over shapes over shapes, constructing that way. The shapes are absolute gold. Not just on the outside in some negative shape, but even in there on the interior of the critter. What else?
The surprise.
Surprise.
Surprise was awesome.
Isn't surprise an interesting thought? I'm going to put on our website an interesting article that I just read on. The reason I'm all about surprise is I'll show you the article that got me thinking about surprise. Really, really interesting article on Slate about, right? So surprise, really interesting and applies directly to our process of journaling. What else?
Negative space.
Negative space is so powerful. Look where the detail isn't, and you can see the shape. Any other big ones?
Turn it upside down.
That's really fun. And go to a used bookstore or a real bookstore and get the new version of Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. All right.
Is it very different?
There's a few changes in it. Her major ideas are in there, but she's got some really great examples, and she's developed her thinking a little bit more. It's a very good book. And also, I want to support other authors and say, you've got to get that book. Get a real one. And actually, when you do it, don't get it on Amazon. Right? Go to a local independent bookstore, and if they don't have it, give them the ISBN number and say, I will come back in a week. Can you get that for me? Really? Right? What if we all did that? We would have our little bookstores back. Mad props to little bookstores. So, here is a pitch for our next workshop. Our next workshop is going to be on how to use gouache. Gouache is like watercolor, but it's opaque, and that means you can cover up your mistakes. There are also some things that are really frustrating about it and really funky about the way that it works, but you can get around these problems. And what it's going to allow you to do is to go from this to this. All right? It's going to take you from this to that. And from this guy to Shazam, right? It's really fun and allows you to do stuff that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do. There are some, I find there are some things that really frustrate about me, but I think I'm getting ways of kind of working around those, and I'm going to be sharing that with you. Now, in order to do that, in order to work with gouache, you actually have to have some gouache, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to have what's called a palette party. And that maybe it's going to be at Lena's house, right? We're going to watch on the Facebook site. We're going to do all the planning and organizing of it right there. And we're all going to show up, and in the course of a few hours, we're going to have an incredible potluck dinner. And we are going to make a whole bunch of mini gouache palettes. So what you want to do is start hoarding. You need to eat mints. Start eating mints and bring those. And now you can get Altoids, but I actually recommend ones that where it doesn't have the word of the brand embossed into the case, because we're going to be putting Rust-Oleum high gloss paint on the inside of this surface here to make our mixing surface. And that way, if it's smooth, you know, that's good. All right, so see if you can get some mints, eat a bunch of mints, and we're going to be bringing those. We've got 3 different dates up on the website. Vote for what are your top ones, or anyone that you can make it to. Click that. And we're going to find out how many people can make it, how many people can't make it but still want one. And what these are a we're going to be making what I call the light gouache palette. So what that is that one of the things that bothers people about gouache is that sometimes it feels kind of chalky. It kind of dries in weird ways. If it's too thick, it can chip off, and it does some weird stuff like that. So the approach we're going to be taking is all the darks in our drawings, we're actually using just regular transparent watercolor. But in our light kit, it's going to have a bunch of light colors of gouache, which we can, so notice that all the darks are watercolor, all the lights are gouache on top of that. And so for next workshop, we're going to be looking at how those work together, and you'll have your own gouache palette. It's going to play very well if you have a little watercolor palette. Those two things can kind of go side by side. You start playing with that on some toned paper, you're a happy camper. All right? So start collecting these guys. Vote for when you'd like to have be in the palette party. If you can't make it, then we are good to go. Again, this year, 2015, this is your year to do nature journaling. You are going to bust out to a whole new level. You think you'll like it now. I want to encourage you to dive in deeper, and you will be amazed at what happens. Both in your ability to draw what you see, to have the image on your paper represent what you're looking at. You can do this. It's just a skill. It's a totally learnable skill. But also, the way which you look at the world around you will open up, and there'll be so much greater richness, beauty, and wonder. And some amazing potlucks, too. So thank you very much. Glad you came.